Alright everyone, buckle up because I've got a long story for you. Back in 2015, I decided I needed to change up my summer routine and became a camp counselor in Ferndale, New York. I'm a Northwest boy, so I decided to drive and make a road trip out of it. It was a blast. The summer was broken up into 3 sections each, 3 weeks long. A kid could stay for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, or whole summer, 9 weeks. The first 3 weeks were wonderful. Those campers had my heart. Amazing kids with amazing hearts. I don't have a single bad thing to say about them. Then the end of the first section came to an end, and I was told I was a part of the team that is to drive to the airport and pick up the new campers that were flying in. That's when I met, let's call him B. B looked like a fat emo early 2010s Justin Bieber, dressed in all black, and was just a loner. I tried talking to him, but it only lasted for so long because other campers were coming, so I had to talk to them as well. On the 2.5-hour drive back to camp, I was distracted by my co-pilot flirting with me. I wasn't expecting it, nor did I really want it, but it was flattering. She was cute, I guess. We pull up to camp around 6 p.m. and one of the campers very quickly approaches me and tells me all the things that B was talking about. In a nutshell, it was cocaine, flashing girls' genitals, and child pornography. I was horrified, especially since this poor girl looked like she had never been exposed to that kind of stuff. I assured her that I would talk to him. Turns out B was in my bunk. Shocker. I pull him aside and tell him that what he talked about was inappropriate and should never be mentioned again. He said okay, and I told him to make his bed. He didn't know how. I told him to get his fitted sheet out of his bag. He didn't know what that was. So I pulled it out of his bag, showed him how to put it on, and very quickly ripped it off before he could sit down and told him to do it. Homie, don't play that. He made his bed and went out for free time, which was basically a time for campers to hang out with each other. I sat down on my porch, opened my Kindle, and began to read. 10 p.m. rolled around and it was time for bed. My boys were back, including B, and lights were out. It's worth noting that my bunk was tucked in the corner for privacy, with a sheet hanging down for ultimate privacy. I loved it. I'd plug in my headphones and put my phone between the springs of the top bunk and watch movies. As I was watching a movie, I heard some steps through my headphones. When they suddenly stopped, I decided to open my curtain, and B was standing 12 feet away, staring at my bed. What do you want, B? I have a question, okay? I'm thirsty. That's a statement, B. Can I play my DS? No, get a drink and go to bed. Guys, I cannot emphasize how terrified I was. He must have been watching me for several minutes before I looked. Needless to say, I didn't sleep. The next morning, my co-counselor Gabe was back, and I told him all about B. Gabe was not excited because he is the counselor that was with them all day. I was leading the activities the rest of the day. Throughout the day, I heard about his attitude, his disobedience. I mean, he's a child at fat camp. What did you expect? It wasn't until nightfall when he came out of his shell. Boys' camp was shaped like a horseshoe of buildings, and the other counselors and I would play Monopoly in the center of the boys' camp. It didn't take long before I saw some campers walk by in horror and anger. Here's what I heard during my hunt for B that night. I spoke to campers who claimed that he threatened to light people on fire, threatened to fight others, threatened to tie up the young girls and rape them, attempted to shove a kid off a 2-story structure. I wish I was lying. I pulled the program director aside and told him this kid needs to go. I very quickly shut him down and told him he didn't know what he was talking about. We found B and got him to bed. Thankfully, I was covering a different bunk and got some sleep. Gabe was screwed. The next morning at breakfast, one of my female counselor friends approached me and told me that B snuck out and watched her in her gross sleep while pleasuring himself at the window. I quickly told the head boys counselors, and he told me that he was in contact with the parents and that B was going home. We just needed to last one more day. Throughout the day, he was a hellion. He cursed at counselors, outright defied basic instruction, like drinking water to stay hydrated, and began to try and grope girls. It was the night of the luau, and so I was setting up some tiki torches, and who shows up but B? He proceeded to put his hand in the fire. I noticed and told him to leave. Later, while the luau was in full swing, B wreaked havoc, making things uncomfortable, stalking girls, eyeing girls, touching himself through his shorts. He was pulled out and kept out under supervision. I pulled my buddies aside and told them that we needed to stay up because I didn't trust B at all not to try and do something to a girl while they were sleeping. So we set up a rudimentary alarm on the back entrance to the bunk, and we all stayed up on the front deck watching The Godfather. About 1 a.m., B tried to escape. When we got back inside, he was on top of his covers pretending to be asleep. Around 3 a.m., we heard grunting, scary grunting. We were scared he was hurting one of the other boys, so we opened the door and saw him spread eagle on his bed, masturbating vigorously while speaking to some entity. His voice was deep, and I just remember hearing him say, "Yeah, give me that blood, you We closed the door and tried to forget what we saw. One by one, everyone fell asleep except for me. I was determined to make sure this kid did no harm. The sun rose, the kids went to breakfast, I went to sleep. I was woken up in a daze by my boys shaking me. Class Mo house, B struck again. Turns out this kid's last act of violence was to take a birdhouse out of a tree and beat a kid in the head with it until he was bloody and unconscious. I felt like I failed. It's worth noting I am a Christian, hence why I didn't really want to flirt and have a fling with the cute co-pilot I drive with. But I mention it because I wasn't about to let this kid have the last word. I believe everyone is worthy of love. Despite the fact that this kid is the first and only kid I have ever thought of as evil, I knew I needed to plant a seed of love. He is being held in the office waiting for the police and his parents, so I go down and ask to talk to him. I get on his level and we look into each other's eyes and I say, "I know why you did what you did just now. I know it was because you couldn't do anything last night. Your rage must have been pent up all night, but I want you to know that I still love you because God still loves you. If you saw this kid, you could have assumed that I had insulted his very existence. I never had someone look at me with such malice. I got up, walked away, and got in line for lunch. Anyway, that's my creepy encounter. I tried to include as much detail as possible for you all. I hope you all enjoyed the story of the camper I dealt with all those years ago."
Over the summer, my boyfriend and I stopped at Walmart to grab a few things on our way to get some sun. I ran in by myself since it was supposed to just be a quick stop. It was hot out, so I was in shorts and a tank top, wearing my mask, of course. There was a man I took notice of because he was wearing a backpack, long pants, a heavy coat, and long sleeves, bike helmet, sunglasses, and a bandana as a mask. I continued on, and as I was walking around the store looking for what I needed, I kept noticing this man. My first thought was he's following me, but brushed it away as being crazy. Then it kept happening. I got nervous when I noticed he still didn't have anything in the cart he was pushing around. I went to the self-checkout and he walked up with his empty cart to the shelves of candy next to me. He was holding his phone up pointed right at me, and there was not a doubt in my mind he was taking pictures of me. I abruptly said, "Hey, are you taking pictures of me?" The man immediately dropped his phone and said, "What?" very quietly. I spoke loudly because I wanted to make sure everyone around me heard, and then I shouted, "I want to know if you've been taking pictures of me. I saw you following me around, watching me, and now you're in the checkout with nothing in your cart." He replied, saying I was tripping and he already bought everything he needed, it was just in his backpack. I shouted even louder, "I don't believe that shit." At this point, everyone was watching us, and the guy quickly walked away, saying I was crazy. I ran out to my boyfriend, shaking violently, and cried once I got in the car. There's no doubt in my mind, I knew exactly what this creep was doing. Stay sexy and fuck politeness.
My boyfriend at the time lived a short ways away down a long one-way that led to a big intersection. A few blocks away from the intersection is where his apartment was. So it's 10 p.m. on Christmas, and he had just gotten home from his family's house and had a couple things to do at home. I didn't have a car at the time, and I was really annoyed that he hadn't picked me up on his way home and that I was still waiting around for him, so I stupidly decided to walk down this one way to his house. The way the street was set up, it was a few houses, but was mostly taken up by a large elementary school and a huge recreational field next to the school, and was really dark. To get to his house, I had to walk the opposite direction of traffic, so any cars coming would be facing me head on. I make it about halfway down this one way, with the elementary school and field to the right of me. And the road on my left, when I see a car approaching. I didn't think much of it until the car started to slow down. As the car comes up to me, all 4 windows roll down, and there are 4 very large young men, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. And they start yelling to me, asking if I want to come have some fun, and making general lewd statements in a very aggressive manner. I obviously ignore them while picking up the pace, trying to make it to this busy intersection that's well lit, right by my boyfriend's house. At this point they are yelling at me to come back, but there is really no room for them to turn the car around, and the only cross street to come back around the block and pass me again was pretty far down the road. I was pretty nervous already, but all of a sudden, these dudes put the freaking car in park, and all 4 of them start getting out of the car. At this point I start fucking booking it to the intersection. I honestly don't remember the last time I ran that fast in my entire life. Luckily, due to the one-way, I was already pretty far ahead of them when they got out of the car, and they didn't have time to come back around the block before I made it to his house. And I'm not even sure they tried, but the fact they actually put the car in park in the middle of the street and got out in the freezing weather yelling at me and starting to chase after me was terrifying. And my boyfriend got pretty upset with me for not just waiting for him, and truly believes that it could have turned out really badly. Needless to say, it wasn't the first, but was definitely the last time I went walking around that neighborhood by myself after dark.
This happened a few years ago between my first and second years of grad school. It was summer, and I had scored a last-minute internship with a small ad agency several states away from where I lived. Luckily, I have family who live in the same city, so I was able to stay with my aunt, uncle, and cousin for 2 months I was interning. My relatives are great and a lot of fun to hang out with. This was the summer Pokemon Go came out, and we got a lot of mileage out of that one. All the same, I was still a 20-something extrovert in a new city, obviously. I started meeting people through Tinder. That summer was a parade of weirdness, including such hits as guy who sent hilariously overposed nudes from his workplace, and the guy who I thought ghosted me but was in fact hospitalized following a suicide attempt. The difference between those guys and the subject of this story is that, unfortunate nudes and the mental health struggles aside, they are both very nice people. This guy, not so much. The city I was staying in is home to a pretty sizable Navy base, so a lot of the guys I came across were military. As a rule, I don't go for anyone whose profession involves combat, weapons, or violence in general, like military, cops, boxers, etc. But I figured this was just for the summer. So when I hit it off with this Navy MP, I agreed to an in-person date. Given that I was dating quite a bit, I made a habit of always meeting the guys at the same pub/restaurant down in town center, So we arranged to meet there, and when the night came, I went through my usual first date routine. Get there half an hour early, do a shot of gnarly bottom shelf tequila to calm my nerves, and start in on beer number 1. About halfway through that beer, in comes my date, resplendent in a rhinestone-studded Affliction t-shirt, the likes of which I hadn't seen on a real person in at least the last 5 years. Little did I know, the bad wardrobe was the least of his issues. He talked about doing drugs, which really isn't my thing, and made a lot of beaner and wetback jokes, which, like Affliction, I hadn't encountered in a hot minute. He was Latino, so it wasn't like he was being racist, but I'm white and feel weird laughing at racial jokes, so that was fun. The more awkward I feel, the more I drink, so bottoms up. Then it went from mere bad first date etiquette to a little troubling. Basically, he committed the cardinal first date sin of bringing up his ex-girlfriend. Actually, multiple ex-girlfriends. And some common threads emerged pretty quickly. Namely that he had treated them all like princesses and they had all been unfaithful to him. He had been the perfect boyfriend and they were all evil Jezebels. His utter belief in his own victimhood was uncomfortable, to say the least, especially combined with the sneering disgust that dripped off of each sentence. I'm pretty sure every woman knows a guy bringing up his ex unprompted and reciting a litany of her sins against him is a big ol' red flag. I had already decided by this point that we probably wouldn't be going out again. At some point, I made a joke in passing about the fact that the uncle I was staying with is a retired senior chief, and could totally look him up. Haha, a fun joke. Or so I thought. Apparently, he took it so seriously because he then, oh so casually but very deliberately, discloses that a woman in his unit had accused him of raping her. Look at him go, ladies and gentlemen, like a stage magician pulling a string of red flags, one after another from his sleeve. He went on to say that it was, of course, total bullshit. She just wanted to get the hell out of Bahrain and thought it would get her reassigned. This was absolutely no big deal to him, and he painted it as a typical of females in the military. If I hadn't before, I would have gotten the sense that at that point, for all he liked me, or at least wanted a shot of sleeping with me, he also had a decidedly shitty view of women in general. Around this point, I stopped ordering beers and instead ordered myself some fries. It was time to sober up and bail. Unfortunately, sobering up took a minute, and in that time, he went on to tell me about another false rape accusation in his life. This time, it was his little half-sister accusing their father of molesting her. This, again, was no big deal to him. She was lying, of course, under the direction of her bitch mother, who thought it would get her sole custody. Yet another tally in the "how much does this guy hate women" column. And the pure vitriol in his voice when he talked about this literal child was disturbing. Now, regardless of whether any of these accusations were true or just as unfounded as he portrayed them, he had chosen to bring up his cheating ex-girlfriends, his lying fellow sailor, his lying little sister, and her scheming mother. All over the course of like 2 hours with a woman he barely knew. He spoke in a non-derogatory way about exactly one woman, his abuela. Every other woman he has ever met was in his eyes a liar, a bitch, a manipulator, or some combination thereof. Thankfully, I sobered up pretty quick after that and declined his offer to walk me to my car. Once I was home, I shook it off pretty easily. Misogynistic pricks exist, unfortunately. But the more I thought about it, the next day, and many times since, the more I realized it was one of those situations that could have gone really, really badly. Had I let him walk me to my car, I would have been in a dark, half-empty parking garage with a guy who at best low-key hates women, at worst actually raped a woman and casually mentioned it to me over drinks, before dogging out a child who was potentially the victim of sexual abuse. The red flags from that one conversation alone were so huge and obvious that, had something happened, my credibility would have been shot. People would have come out in droves to say I was at fault for putting myself in this situation with someone who was so clearly disturbed. I honestly thank God nothing came of it, but it was another sad case of victim blaming waiting to happen. For the record, false reports of rape only make up about 2 to 10% of all accusations. And that's out of the 37% that even get reported at all. An estimated 63% never are. So folks, if anyone ever tells you that they were accused of rape but it's totally untrue, of course run, don't walk in the other direction. Better safe than sorry.
I volunteered in a small public library as a reference librarian full-time in the summer of 2017. Every library has some library regulars, whether they are regulars you look forward to seeing or regulars you want to hide from. When I was working, I was told to be wary of somebody we will call Matthew. I shortly afterward found out why. Matthew would come to the library daily and ask to look at children's picture books, and then would come up to the desk and talk to us about different things. Admittedly, Matthew had always seemed crazy or on edge. He started asking to talk to me, though, which started making me unsettled. One day Matthew came in for his regular routine and told me, "Hey, I met this chick at this gas station down the road, and we have a date Friday night. The plan is that we meet at the gas station alone on Friday night, take a taxi to Taco Bell, then eat dinner and taxi back to the gas station." I wished him luck with his date as fast as possible, and Matthew was on his way. The following Monday, he came back in and was visibly very upset. Matthew stormed over to the circulation desk and demanded another employee to get me so he could talk to me in the teens section, which was secluded in the back of the library. I was already shoving books in that area, so the employee just told him to go find me. Matthew comes up to me and says, "We gotta talk about my date, now." I tried to stay calm, but was worried by how angry he was, and asked him what happened. Matthew went on to say, "Yeah, I met that bitch and she expected me to pay for the taxi rides. When she left her purse at the table to go grab the food, I tried to look for money in it, but couldn't find any. She saw me and made me go home alone. On the way home, I stopped at a buddy's house and he gave me a gun. Now, if anybody makes me angry ever again, I can blow their head off." I was so sick from what he told me, but I had to treat the situation carefully because I wasn't sure if he currently had the gun with him. I said, "I'm so sorry that happened," and was able to make an escape, telling him that I unfortunately had some more books on a cart in the back that I needed to grab so I could shove more and would be right back. As soon as I got to the break room, I dialed 911 and let my supervisor know right away. Luckily, I handled the situation correctly, as Matthew was found to have the gun on him when the police arrived. I made a statement, and the library placed a restraining order on him. To this day, I still wonder about what could have happened if I reacted differently.
A few months ago, I was on my way to visit a friend who lived a few minutes away. It was dusk, so it wasn't entirely dark yet, and I haven't owned a car in years, so I was riding my motorcycle to meet her. About halfway there, my front headlight completely dies, and I'm left with no light but the small glow of my speedometer. At this point, I decide to try and make it back to my apartment before night completely falls, and exit to turn around. With the traffic on the road, I don't make it far enough home. I'm close enough I recognize the area, but not close enough to try and walk the bike the few miles back. I ride through the dark and pull into a somewhat lit parking garage next to a restaurant, figuring I can call for a tow and grab something to eat while I wait. I park my bike and hang my helmet off the bar, before doing the standard woman alone look around a mostly empty place. There's a few cars, but they're empty, and some of the lights are either flickering or completely out, and the path to the little hallway that leads up to the restaurant is completely black. I look to check my phone and lock my ignition, and out of the corner of my eye, I notice something in one of the flickers. By the time I look up, nothing's there. At this point, the feeling in my stomach is twisting, and I'm slightly on edge. I look around again, staying on my bike while hoping I'm just being skittish, but nothing jumps out of the dark at me. I manage to slightly calm down and dial my insurance number, and after about 10 minutes, a wrecker is heading in my way to arrive in about 30 minutes. As I go to step off my motorcycle, I get the feeling I'm being watched, and start slowly scanning the parking garage again. Then I see him. A moderately tall man, maybe about 200 or so pounds, standing on the edge of where the light stops. My first thought is security guard, or someone who just parked and is heading to the restaurant, but he just stands there, watching. As I try to head towards the hallway, he begins moving in the same direction. When I stop, so does he. I start to walk again, feeling vulnerable, so I reach for my purse to grab my keys. I just find empty air and I see I've left my purse hanging from my handlebars. I turn to look at the stranger again, but he's gone. Now getting more than spooked, I power walk back and grab my purse, but when I turn around, I see his figure standing in the dark between me and the hallway. I step back and stand in the light next to my motorcycle before freezing and just fumbling with my purse, trying to find anything to use as a weapon besides my keychain. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but let my thumb hover over the call button, just waiting to see what he does. For what felt like an eternity, he just stands in the dark watching until a truck finally begins to pull into the garage. Before the headlights illuminate him, he slowly turns and walks off into the dark garage. The wrecker parks next to me and notices I look more than off, asking if I'd like to wait in the truck. Once I'm safely in, and my bike is loaded on the back, I tell him what happened. Thankfully that was the end of it, and I was dropped off safely where I live, but it still makes me shiver and really consider whether or not to ride at night.
This all happened about a year ago, but I remember it like it happened just minutes ago. My mom's sister and I were driving to a town about 20 minutes away to meet my grandparents for dinner, but instead of taking the freeway like normal, we took side streets. SoCal traffic is no joke, especially during rush hour. So there we were, driving through one of the sketchier parts of town, when our mom saw a man with a ridiculous haircut in the lane to the right of us and innocently pointed it out. When I say ridiculous, think a man that is entirely bald except for one patch right on the base of his neck, and one in the front, styled in a sort of 2000s faux hawk. We laughed it off and didn't think anything else of the man until we pulled beside him at a stop sign a minute later. Then I saw it. This man was covered in blood. But not like he had injured himself. It was more like it had splattered all over him while he was doing who knows what. We tried to reason with ourselves and figured, hey, maybe he's a painter and he had an accident at work and needs to go change. But nope. Then we saw something even more disturbing. Not only was the blood splattered all over his polo shirt, but it looked as though he had rubbed it up and down the tops of his arms as well. The most disturbing part, however, was when we looked at his face. The blood or paint or whatever the substance was smeared onto his face in what looked to be the shape of the cross. The deliberate smearing is what really got us. Before then we thought whatever happened could have been an accident, but that's no accident. I realize now it probably isn't smart to stare at someone who you suspect of a crime, such as murder, but it was just one of those things where you can't look away. My sister claims that he looked right at her in the back seat, smiled a sinister smile, and looked into her soul, with the most empty and void of emotion eyes she has ever seen. Of course we called the police to report the man, and even the operator seemed shaken by us explaining to her that no, the man did not seem to be hurt at all and that we thought it was someone else's blood that he was covered in. Unfortunately, we never heard anything back from the police in that town. We will never know if he really was just a painter that had an accident at work. Maybe a man who practiced Santeria, or a psychopath who needed to go home and clean himself up.
This story may not be as scary as the others, but it still bothers me to this day, as I could never figure out what these men's true intentions were. I think reading stories like these, and on Let's Not Meet, created better judgment for me on that night. I'm not sure if this context is needed, but we both looked very young for our age, and we are both only 5'2". We dressed casually in jeans, boots, and cute shirts. We were only going out that night to have fun, not trying to attract attention. This took place in the span of 4-ish hours. It was a few years ago where my best friend had just turned 21. I had turned 21 a few months prior and was excited as this would be the first night the both of us could go to the bar together to celebrate. We decided to head downtown, as there is one street that has a bunch of bars that you can hop between throughout the night. We decided on the bar that has a younger crowd than the others, and included a separate room with a dance floor. This was a loud, extremely busy bar, so we felt more comfortable, as this is our first time. We picked a booth and just kind of took in the atmosphere, catching up with each other, and each ordered a drink. Maybe an hour or two in, I felt that uneasy feeling of being watched. I looked past my friend, and I noticed two men in the booth behind her that weren't there before. I met eyes with one of them, quickly looking away to avoid any awkwardness, and continued talking with my friend. After this happened a few more times, I leaned down and whispered to my friend that this man kept staring at us. She got a worried look on her face, so I suggested that we move to the room with the dance floor so we could get away from them. We headed to the next room, avoiding looking at these men as we passed. At that time, there were only 2 other people in the seating area and everyone else was on the dance floor. Of course, not long after, these men entered the room as well and sat one table away from us. This time I was able to look at them better. They seemed older, maybe mid-30s, early 40s. They were dressed extremely nice and looked like they had money. They stared some more and were conversing, but they didn't approach, so I started to think maybe I was overreacting. We decided to get a second drink and ended up having to move to another table, as someone grabbed ours when we were up. This table happened to have 4 chairs. When I checked to see if they were still watching us, I met eyes with the same man as before. This time he smiled and waved his hand in motion of asking us to come over. I just ignored him. I told my friend not to look their way anymore, and hopefully they would understand that we were not interested. Luckily, a girl we knew from high school approached us to say hi, very drunk, LOL, but we were thankful for the distraction and hoped that they saw we knew other people there. Minutes after she left, 3 younger guys tried to chat us up and wanted us to dance with them. Thinking back, maybe we should have taken the offer. Once they realized we weren't interested, they decided to leave. I guess this made the 2 men think that they could do the same thing. They came and sat down at our table without asking. During the whole interaction, the one man I kept making eye contact with was smiling and ended up doing all the talking. His friend just sat there the entire time, no smiling, and just watched. My friend and I were both visibly uncomfortable. My friend immediately shut down when they approached us and wouldn't look up, so I realized I would have to take charge of the situation. The smiling man leaned in and asked if we wanted another drink. I said no, we're fine, and done drinking for the night. He said, "Ah, but you 2 don't look like you're having fun." I said we were, and we were just waiting for our friends to return, hoping that would spook him off. No such luck. He leaned closer to me to where our knees touched and asked if I spoke Spanish. I said no and moved closer to my friend. He said we both looked very beautiful and asked for our names. I gave him fake names. Then he asked if we're sure we didn't want any more drinks and that he could get us a real drink to try. As he got up to go to the bar, I grabbed my friend's hand and announced loudly that we found our friends on the dance floor and left the table. I squeezed both of us into the center of the dance floor in the hopes that the men would lose sight of us. Unfortunately, when we looked back up to the seating area, both men were glaring down at us. They looked extremely angry, and it scared me so much that I told her we were staying on this dance floor until the bar closed. That way we could leave with a big group of people. When the night ended, we exited with the flow of people, and I kept watching our backs to make sure they weren't following us. Unfortunately, once we were out of the bar, we had to make it down the street to our car. When I glanced back up again, I noticed the man exiting the bar and making a beeline towards us. I turn back and just repeat, "Run, run, 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 run," to my friend and sprint back to her car. We make it in and she locks the doors. Luckily, she had parked in front of the entrance of a different bar, and people were pouring out of it. The cops had now started patrolling the street as well, and we both heaved a big sigh of relief. We both sat there for a second trying to locate the men, but they had now vanished. We were paranoid that they would follow her car. It was very distinct. But we made it home safe. We joke about it now, and it definitely made us both more aware of our surroundings. I just often wonder what their intentions were of getting us to drink more, to go home with them, or something more sinister. They never approached anyone else that night. It was a very populated bar. I also never saw them with any drinks of their own. Something just never sat right with me about that. Anyways, be careful out there, guys, and stay safe.
So it was 3 years back in my sophomore year of college. Me and my good friend both had a paper due the next day that we had not written, so we decided to pull an all-nighter and get it done. Around 3 a.m. we decided to go get some food, and so when we come back to our apartment complex, we decided to hang out in the car and enjoy the outside and the stars and just wind down from our really long night. We park in a spot that is close to her apartment and near this big wooded area. The wooded area starts about 8 feet from where our car is. As soon as we pull up, I'm telling you, I felt icky. Like I knew something was off. It was just in the air, and I'm very perceptive to things around me and always have been. I don't know if you have ever experienced this before, but have you ever had a bug somewhere on your body and you kind of feel it but ignore it, thinking it's a strand of hair or just an itch, only to look down and realize it actually is a fucking bug? That's what this part was like. So I kept seeing something in the woods out of the corner of my eye, but I just ignored it. I didn't actually think anything was there and that it was just the branches blowing in the wind. So we sit there for about 10 to 15 minutes, talking and eating, and then I finally decided to look to my left and look closer at what was bothering me. That's when I saw it. 2 huge eyes staring right at me. When I say right at me, I mean it. They weren't looking at my friend, they were looking at me. And when I finally looked that direction for real, we made direct eye contact. Worst part, he immediately starts walking towards my car, and I realize this man is huge. Almost unbelievably huge. And it was so creepy because I just know that this person had been staring at us for the longest, because in hindsight, I know that it was him that I had kept seeing out of the corner of my eye. And when I finally looked, we made direct eye contact immediately. So that leads me to believe he had been watching me for a long time. I legitimately could not move. I have never in my life, and I've been mighty scared before, been so terrified that I could not make my body work. He was basically at my window before I finally threw it in reverse and booked it out of there. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror, and he was just standing there in the middle of the parking spot I was just in, making eye contact with me through my mirrors. I swear his eyes were yellow, and he was so unusually large, thin, yet strong and lean, and his limbs seemed too long and out of proportion. Something was so off about this man. I think about all the possibilities. What if I hadn't seen him? What would have happened if we exited the car? Surely that's what he was waiting for. It's so sickening. I also can't shake how creepy it was that he only showed himself once I saw him. Like, why didn't he just go back to hiding in the woods? Or why didn't he come out sooner? Why'd he stand there staring at us? Regardless, I'm thankful. I'm blessed with such an observant eye. I don't think many people would have noticed something like that since he was hidden so well. Ever since this night, I've never been the same and probably never will be again. Edit. Sorry for the confusion. Did I mention he had a knife? That's why I think he was trying to kill me. LOL. Sorry, I left out the worst part of this story.
So when I was 19, I had my first ever job working at a pet store. I was super shy and had some social anxiety, but working with people who were constantly talking about animals helped me sort of break out of my shell. Anyways, it's about 8:30-ish, 20 minutes before we close, and this person walks in. They had the physical appearance of a male, but they were dressed in very feminine clothes. Hey, I'm not judging, do your thing. Well, I'm hanging out at the ferret cage, making sure they're fed and have water, when this person approaches me and we start chatting about ferrets. We talk about how cute they are and how they're so sweet, and that they had ferrets themselves when they were younger. Well, then they ask me if I would like to see some pictures of their babies. I say yes, thinking we're still talking about ferrets. Like, hell yeah, I want to see some pictures of baby ferrets. They pull a scrapbook out of their bag and plop it open on top of the ferret cage. The first picture I see is a small pink blob on a paper towel. Now, it took me a second to figure out what I was looking at. They were showing me undeveloped human fetuses, laying on what looked like someone's kitchen table. I'm mortified. I have this random person standing next to me, showing me the equivalent of a real-life horror movie. They continue to flip through the book, explaining how each child had died. Oh yeah, there was more than one. At this point, I'm so shocked I'm not saying anything. I'm standing there, that permanent fake retail worker smile just plastered on my face. They finally get to the last picture and talk a little more. I'm in shock at this point, so I'm not even listening. And then they finally leave. I run to the door and lock it behind them. It's literally just me and my manager in the store at that point. I start to walk to the bathroom because I feel like I'm about to throw up, and my manager looks at me and asks what's wrong. He was in the back restocking, so I was alone at the front, watching the registers and the animals. Then I try to explain to him what the fuck I just witnessed, while trying not to puke and cry. He then asks what this person looked like, and I start explaining. My manager says, if you ever see them again, tell someone, and we will call the cops and all that. Luckily, the person never came back. I'm 22 years old now, and those images are still burned into my brain. Now, you can try to tell me this wasn't real and this person was just playing a joke, but why the fuck would you do that? It wasn't even near Halloween or anything. Like, I live in a bad town. I understand that most of the population here is nothing but drug addicts and batshit crazy people. But dear God, I was not expecting that. I no longer work at the store. It closed in January of 2019, so if you do ever find out what store I'm talking about, you will sadly not be able to visit the place that I was mentally scarred. Thank you for reading.